So during my past stream, my computer, yeah, it was interrupted because my computer shut down. Why did it shut down? Well, that's because I forgot to plug it in, and I got too excited reading. So that's what happened. And I really don't know how far you are, but I know how far I am, and I know that if you're following, you might not have followed what's really happening here, because I'm not sure that I follow it myself. But the essence of what's happening is that the bank borrows from another bank, right? And that bank borrows again from another bank, and again that bank borrows from the other bank, and that bank borrows from the other bank, and that happens and goes on for, on and on and on and on and on again for a couple of times. And I think the essence is that, is this what we call raising money by circulation, because every time things are traded, they are traded with a certain interest, and this interest is of course increasing the money supply, right? Because then you're lending with a higher amount, a higher amount. But of course, this can only continue as long as you are capable of paying back the money, right? Yes, we're at page 164 now. Yes, I'm just gonna, this is not, this is a continuation of podcast number 2. I've called it podcast number 3 as to increase the numbers of podcasts that I have, but rather it is not to have 2A and 2B and confuse people that are watching this. The main idea is that this is a podcast made by me, Karim. We talk about economics. It's very spontaneous. This podcast is worth your time because, as you can see, it's very spontaneous. It's very informative, as is quite highlighted here even by Adam Smith, right, where he says, I'm just going to read it out because I think this is very beautiful. The practice of drawing and redrawing is so well known to all men of business that it may perhaps be thought unnecessary to give an account of it. But as this book may come into the hands of many people who are not men of business, and as the effect of this practice upon the banking trade are not perhaps generally understood even by men of business themselves, I shall endeavor to explain it in explain it as distinctly as I can. So it's very informative. You have to keep in mind that I've studied economics for 5 years, right? And this is also a little bit complicated for me, which is quite interesting because this book is written more than 230 years ago, or was published more than 230 years ago. Maybe it's written more than 250 years ago. I don't know. But yeah, thirdly, it's very open-minded, and you also see that by me being mind blown a lot of times, and thinking about, well, what is this really about? And also we question everything that we read here together. So usually, beside this podcast, usually the agenda is that we go through the news. So for the news of today, you can go and watch podcast number 2, where we discussed Corona, we discussed Hong Kong, and we discussed the opening of Denmark to other European nations. And then we had a follow-up from last time, i.e. podcast 1, where we talked about having money based on gold or the forex market, right? And there's a huge discussion here. You might think, well, what? You're comparing gold to the forex market? Well, yes, it makes perfect sense if you go back and watch it. And then we have a reading session, which I was doing previously, and I got interrupted by a computer that just shut down without giving. Well, it did definitely give me some notice, but I did not notice it because I was too invested in reading. And then we have new thoughts, and those are the notes that I usually take down, and I think that will definitely be a big part of this podcast today. And then we have a Q&A, which is kind of non-existent so far because we have really not well, I suppose that we can interact at some point, right? Right now it's just me, but at some point we can interact, right? We have not really talked together yet. At some point we will. You might even see this on YouTube and then write a comment, and then I will raise that question up in a different podcast, in the podcast the day after or something like that, or maybe even the evening after, because I might at some point start to do 2 or 3 or 4 of these a day, because as I said in the first podcast yesterday, I'm unemployed, which is something that I'm experiencing actually for the second time in my life. But the second time I had just turned 18, and I did not have an economics degree. Yes, I'm just gonna read from here. This payment, therefore, was altogether okay. I don't want to tell you this word, so I'm gonna go a little bit further up. Okay, so the bill which A in Edinburgh drew upon B in London, he regularly discounted 2 months before they were due, with some bank or banker in Edinburgh, and the bills which B in London redrew upon A in Edinburgh, he as regularly discounted, either with the Bank of England or with some other banker in London. Whatever was advanced upon such circulating bills was in Edinburgh advanced in the paper of the Scotch banks, and in London when they were discounted at the Bank of England in the paper of that bank. Though the bills upon which this paper had been advanced were all of them repaid in their turn as soon as they became due, yet the value which had been really advanced upon the first bill was never really returned to the bank which advanced it, because before each bill became due, another bill was always drawn to somewhat a greater amount than the bill which was soon to be paid, and that discounting of this other bill was essentially necessary towards the payment of that which was soon to be due. This payment, therefore, was altogether fictitious. And I have to highlight this. There's so much that needs to be highlighted in this part of the book. So raising money by circulation might be fictitious. Maybe that's the big question for today. The stream which is fictitious. The stream which by means of those circulating bills of exchange had once been made to run out from the coffers of the banks was never replaced by any stream which really ran into them. The paper which was issued upon those circulating bills of exchange amounted upon many occasions to the whole fund distant from carrying on some vast and extensive projects of agriculture, commerce, or manufacturers, and not merely to that part of it which had there been no paper money, the project would have been obliged to keep by him unemployed, and in ready money for answering occasional demand. The greater part of this paper was consequently over and above the value of the gold and silver which would have been circulated in the country had there been no paper money. It was over and above, therefore, what the circulation of the country would easily absorb and employ. Oh, absorb and employ, and upon the account immediately return upon the bank in order to exchange the gold and silver, which they were to find as they could. It was a capital which, those projects had very artfully contrived to draw from those banks, not only without their knowledge or deliberate consent, but for some time perhaps without their having the most distinct suspicion that they had really advanced it. That means instead of one, well, there are three cases right here. Here there are three cases. So the project could have existed if, and here the agricultural project, right, could have existed if the individual just had the money beside him in gold and he would just spend it at will. That of course would be very slow, right? Because, and also very costly, because he would have this money in huge, let's call them trucks, but he would have them in a warehouse somewhere. Now the other case is that he just lends this money from the bank once. But in this case that Adam Smith is describing, he doesn't lend one money, right? He doesn't lend it once. This thing has occurred between the banks, so they have earned the money, right? They have earned some money, and then they sell this bond, or they give this bond to this agricultural person. He has it, and then he has to pay the money back, right? And this way, those bankers have earned the money by transactioning it between them. Interesting. When two people who are continually drawing and redrawing upon one another discount their bills, always with the same banker, he might, maybe I've understood it incorrectly, but let's see. And that's page 165 now. When two people who are continually drawing and redrawing upon one another discount their bill, always with the same banker, he must immediately discover that they are about and see clearly that they are trading not with a capital of their own, but with the capital which he advances to them. But this discovery is not altogether so easy when they discount their bills, sometimes with one banker and sometimes with another, and when the two same persons I didn't know that person had a plural, but okay. Do not constantly draw and redraw upon one another, but occasionally run the round of a greater circle of projects. And that's, I don't know if you got to hear that, but he started then talking about A, B, C, D, and E, right? Projects who find it of their interest to assist one another in this method of raising money and to render it upon their accounts as difficult as possible to distinguish between the real and the fictional bill exchange. Bill exchange between a bill drawn, and that's the blockchain, right? That's what the blockchain. So modern day blockchain would have an account of this, right? That's an important discussion. Between a bill drawn by a real creditor upon a real debtor and a bill drawn probably no real creditor but the bank which discounted it, nor any real debtor but the projector who made use of the money. When a banker had been made when a banker had even made this discovery, he might sometimes make it too late and might find that he had already discounted the bill of those projects to be so great an extent that by refusing to discount any more, he would necessarily make them all bankrupts, right? And thus, by ruining them, might perhaps ruin himself. For his own interest and safety, therefore, he might find it necessary in this very perilous situation to go on for some time, endeavoring, however, to withdraw gradually, and upon the account making every day greater and greater difficulties discounting them in order to force these projectors by degrees to have recourse either to other bankers or to other methods of raising money, so as that he himself might, as soon as possible, get out of the circle. The difficulties, accordingly, which the Bank of England, which their principal bankers in London, and which even the more prudent Scotch banks began after a certain time, and when all of them had already gone too far to make and that's what happened with the financial crisis, right, in 2008, the recession. This is exactly what happened. About discounting not only alarmed no, so the Scotch bank after a certain time, and when all of them had already gone too far to make about discounting, not only alarmed but enraged in the highest degree those projectors, their own distress of which this prudence and necessary reserve of the banks was no doubt the immediate occasion. They called the distress of the country, and this distress of the country, they said, was altogether owing to the ignorance and pusillanimity. Never seen this word before. Pusillanimity and bad conduct of the banks, which did not give a sufficient liberal aid to the spirited undertaking of those who exerted themselves in order to beautifully improve and enrich the country. It was the duty of the banks, they seemed to think. So the Scotch Bank and the Bank of England are the central banks in this case, right? To lend for as long as they seem to think to lend for as long a time and to as great an extent as they might wish to borrow. The banks, however, by refusing in this manner to give more credit to those to whom they had already given a great deal too much, took the only method by which it was now possible to save their own credit or the public credit of the country. In the midst of this clamorous and distress, a new bank was established in Scotland for the express purpose of relieving the distress of the country. The design was generous, but the execution was imprudent, and the nature and causes of the distress which it meant to relieve were not perhaps well understood. This bank was more liberal than any other had ever been, both in the granting cash accounts and in discounting bill of exchange. With regard to the latter, it seems to have made scarce any distinction between real and circulating bills, but to have discounted all equally. It was the avowed principle of this bank to advance upon any reasonable security the whole capital which was to be employed in those improvements of which the returns are the most slow and distant, such as the improvement of land. To promote such improvements was even said to be the chief of the public spirit purpose for which it was instituted. By liberty, it granted cash accounts, and in discounting bills of exchange, it no doubt issued great quantities of its banknotes But those bank notes, being the greater part of them, over and above what circulating in the economy could easily absorb, an employee returned upon it in order to be exchanged for gold and silver as fast as they were issued. It offered ever more. No. Its coffers were never well filled. The capital, which had been subscribed to this bank at two different subscriptions, amounted to £160,000, of which 80% only was paid up. The sum ought to have been paid in several different installments. A great part of the proprietaries, when they paid in their first installment, opened a cash account with the bank, and the directors, th- thinking themselves obliged to treat their own proprietaries with the same liberty with which they treated all other men, allowed many of them to borrow upon this cash account what they said in upon all their subsequent installments. Such payments, therefore, only put into one coffer what had the moment before been taken out of them. Been taken out of another. Sorry, maybe been before been taken out of another. But had the coffers of this bank been filled ever so well, its excessive circulation must have uh, emptied them faster than they could have been replenished by any other expedient. But the ruinous one of drawing upon London, and when the bill became due, paying it, together with the interest and commission, by another drought upon the same place. Its coffers having been filled so very ill, it is said to have been driven to this resource within a very few months after it began to do business. The estates of the proprietaries of the bank were worth several millions, and by this, their subscriptions to the original bond or contract of the bank were really pledged for answering all its engagements. By means of the great credit which so great a pledge necessarily gave it, it was, notwithstanding its too liberal conduct, enabled to carry on business for more than 2 years. When it was obliged to stop, it had in the circulation about £200,000 in the in banknotes. In order to support the circulation of those notes, which were continually returning upon it as fast as they were issued, it had been constantly in the practice of drawing bills in exchange upon London, of which the number and value were continuously increasing, and when it stopped, amounted to upwards of £600,000. This bank therefore had in little more than the course of 2 years advanced to different people upwards of £800,000 at 5%. Upon the 200,000 pound upon the £200,000 which it circulated in banknotes, this 5% might perhaps be considered as a clear gain without any other deduction besides the expense of management. But upon upwards of £600,000, for which it was continuously drawing bills of exchange upon London, it was paying in the way of interest and commission upwards of 8%, and was continuously losing more than 3% upon more than 3/4 of its deals. The operations. I'm just trying to see how much we're talking about this bank. because I want to sum up what we've been through today. But yeah. Yeah. Let's see. The operations of this bank seem to have produced effects quite opposite to those which were intended by the particular person who planned and directed it. They seem to have intended to support the spirited undertakings, for as such they considered them, which were at that time carrying on in different parts of the country, and at the same time by drawing the whole banking business to themselves to supplant all the Scotch banks, particularly those established at Edinburgh, whose backwardness in discounting bills of exchange had given some offense. This bank no doubt gave some temporary relief to those projects and enabled them to carry on their projects for about 2 years longer than they could otherwise have done, but it thereby only enabled them to get so much deeper into debt, so that when ruin came, it fell so much the heavier both upon them and upon their creditors. The operation of this bank, therefore, instead of relieving, in reality, aggravated in the long run the distress which those projects had brought upon both upon themselves and upon their country. It would have been much better for themselves, their creditors, and their country had the greater part of them been obliged to stop 2 years sooner than they actually did. The temporary relief, however, which this bank afforded to those projects has proved a real and permanent relief to the other Scotch banks. All the dealers in circulating bills of exchange, which those other banks had become so backward in discounting, had recourse to this new bank, where they were received with open arms. Those other banks, therefore, were enabled to get very easy out of the fatal circle, from which they could not otherwise have disengaged themselves without incurring a considerable loss, and perhaps too even some degree of discredit, so bankruptcy. In the long run, therefore, the operations of this bank increased the real distress of the country, which it seemed to relieve, and effectively relieve from a very great distress those rivals whom it meant to supplant. At the first setting out of this bank, it was the opinion of some people that how fast soever its coffers might be emptied, it might easily replenish them by raising money upon the securities of those to whom it had advanced its paper. Experience, I believe, soon convinced them that this method of raising money was by much too slow to answer their purpose, and that coffers which originally were so ill filled and which emptied themselves so very fast could be replenished by no other expenditure but the ruinous one of drawing bills upon London, and when they became due, paying them by other draughts of the same place with accumulated interest and commission. But though they had been able by this method to raise money as fast as they wanted it, yet instead of making a profit, they must have suffered a loss of very such operations, so that in the long run they must have ruined themselves as a mercantile company, though perhaps not so soon as by the more expensive practice of drawing and redrawing. They could still have made nothing by the interest of the paper, which being over and above what the circulating of the economy could absorb and employ, returned upon them in order to be exchanged for gold and silver as fast as they issued it, and for the payment of which they were themselves continually obliged to borrow money. On the contrary, the whole expense of this borrowing, of employing agents to look out for people who had money to lend, of negotiating with those people and drawing the proper bond or assignment must have fallen upon them and have been so much clear loss upon the balance of their accounts. The project of replenishing their coffers in this manner may be compared to that of a man who had a water pond from which a stream was continually running out and into which no stream was continuously running, but who proposed to keep it always frequently full by employing a number of people to go continuously with buckets to a well at some miles distance in order to bring money to replenish it. Come on, my man. This pond example is not the first time you also saw it in the first podcast. I think that's it for today with the reading, because I can feel it. So there is a physical limit, but every day it seems to be longer and longer, which is okay. My reading skills are also increasing, which is good because, well, secret to you guys, I'm dyslexic apparently. Not apparently, it was really severe, but I've really forced myself to read, and reading out loud really helps. So this is also personal gains for me, not only informative and open-minded and spontaneous, it's also learning for me. So 167, that's where we ended. That's where we'll pick up tomorrow. But let's look at the notes that I wrote down. Of course, I also have a quote. So, adverse selection and information asymmetry between banks and their debtors. That was the idea that there are two reasons to employ money. Two reasons to ask debtors for, I think, installments continuously, and that was first to know how these people were actually doing, right? Like, are they doing good or are they distressed? And secondly, well, that's the asymmetry part, because the bank cannot know if it's lending out. He had an example with an individual lending to 10, well, then he can ask upon that. But if you're lending to 500 people, it's a little bit difficult to keep control of them, and therefore this installment that has to be paid continuously for like with short intervals gives us an idea if this business is profitable or not, and also it gives a better information if the market contains a lot of money or not. Like, is it worthwhile to, let's say, print out more money, right, or not? It's not print, but it's issuing these bonds, right? And the second thing that I have here is a bond and mortgage market that is tradable, and that is the idea that it should not be the bank that takes on bonds and mortgages, but it's rather the individuals who not themselves do these huge projects that need so much lending, because in that way these individuals can put their money to work, right? And that should be tradable for the individuals. Now he says that this should not be for the banks though. And then of course he goes in and describes this A to B, Edinburgh, London borrowing, inter in intra in bank industry lending, but it's inter bank lending. And then you had the problem of over trading, and that relates directly to raising money by circulation. As we saw, there's going to be an interest upon this lend, and also maybe some money beside that, right? That I'm allowing you to be, to do this risky business with me, because at the end of the day, we're going to sell this to a businessman with a big project that has to pay us back all the things that we have earned. Now, I related this. Then that was described that some of it is fictitious, right? Money that is created fictitiously by this over trading between partners, but some of it is, of course, also real. Now, I related this to blockchain technology because in the book, Adam Smith says that this might be a little bit difficult, right, to keep track on how it has been traded and where it really started and how it went on about. And today, well, we have the blockchain technology that can tell us exactly where things started and how it has been traded. And that's the whole idea with Bitcoin. It was so big because of the blockchain technology that fueled it, or that was the backbone of its success, right? Because it was so secure. And I'd like to also read out this part of the book that I have here, which really describes what's happening with this raising money by circulation. So, the house is crazy, says a weary traveler to himself, and will not stand for very long. But it is a chance if it falls tonight, and I will venture, therefore, to sleep in it tonight. So the house is crazy. So the operation of what's really happening in this industry is really crazy, and this is still happening to this day. Today, I will doubt it if this doesn't happen. This is a weary traveler. That's an outside opinion, right? So someone that goes into this, maybe the bankers themselves think that this is crazy, and will not stand for long. They believe that it will not stand for long, and as we see with this bank, there is a collapse, right? Not with this bank, but before that, we expect that there's too much money, and then this bank comes in, and after 2 years, there's a collapse. And we also saw that while this bank existed, a lot of other banks tried to get out of the business, so they knew that this would not be sustainable in the long run because there's too much fictional money, right? But it is a chance if it falls tonight, right? It's not certain that it will fall tonight. It's only a chance, right? And I will venture. Usually when we say venture, there is some risk involved. Therefore, to sleep in it tonight. That means that the bankers know that this crazy intertrade between the banks might be to some degree fictional and will or producing fictional money and will not exist for very long. Not for the long run. It's not sustainable for the long run. But for today, the short run, it's only a chance that it will all fall apart and collapse. So I will risk it and sleep in it tonight. Yes. And then I wrote here also, that comes, I think, actually from number 2, podcast number 2, talk about negative interest rates. We're talking about, well, what does it mean if suddenly I don't earn money by doing this raising money by circulation, but I lose money. That's basically what it's all about, right? Or just the same, there's no profit in it. Well, in that case, that's the new idea that I need to think about for next time. But let's talk a little bit about it. Let's be spontaneous. Let's be open-minded, but mostly spontaneous. Well, with negative interest rates, of course, if there is no this commission as he talks about, he says that there's mandatory 5%, and then you can take upon it something else. But let's assume this 5% is now zero, right? Might be negative, right? But for the sake zero, and then there is a commission. Is this commission zero also now, or is it above? Does it cancel out such that there's always going to be a profit for the banks? That's an interesting thought, because otherwise they wouldn't do this circulation, this raising money by circulation. But as we see here in Denmark today, most banks, for large accounts, have a negative interest rate. That means that it costs money for individuals to have their money saved in the bank. Well, because the bank has to lend this money out, and by lending it creates this story between buying and selling. And if that's negative from the central bank's point of view, then well, so with negative interest rate, what does this mean? Does it mean that we suddenly stop, that everything stops? Does it mean that money is less worth? Well, negative interest rates usually mean, well, a low interest rate. Let's just say a low interest rate. A low interest rate at the first place means that as we discussed it, it means that there is very low business in the that we're only lending to people that we are kind of guaranteed to be able to get the money back from, right? Because high interest rate means that this is risky, and therefore we need a higher reward to give you the money for this period of time. And also, this is a way of pushing money more into, well, it really isn't if you're asking for a high interest, but you're pushing for a lot of money to come back. But I think that's also a way of generating a lot of money. If you have a high interest, you also generate a lot of money at the bank. Okay. Interest rate becomes zero. Let's call it the average interest rate, right, in the economy, because some of it is higher, some of it is lower. But of course I don't know the bandwidth. I don't know if the standard deviation has increased or not. I only know the mean, or maybe it's also the median. I don't know. And this is also something that I have in my mind just to understand it. Maybe it's not maybe, but I think I'm certain in saying that this is not, of course, how it works. But at least this is the interest rate that I have in my mind. So let's say we have zero. What then happens? Well, let's say that the standard deviation is constant, just for the sake of the argument. Well, then it means that there are less risky business out there. There's less need. Well, firstly, the economy is not expanding, right? Well, that's not the first opinion, but the economy is not expanding because people are not being risky. People are not needing this money. Okay. If it becomes negative, and I'm giving you money to lend money. Now, of course, the low interest rate should also incentivize more companies to come in, but that doesn't happen if there's no opinion to expand, right? So I think that's why you need inflation. You need money. We need money in the economy at this point in order to sustain a high interest rate. So if the interest rates go down, it means that it becomes cheaper to loan money. It becomes more expensive to lend money because you're not earning as much on it. With negative interest rates, there's really no reason to run a business anymore. Because eventually you'll lose. I'm trying to understand if raising money by circulation then comes into play here, and can maybe cancel out the negative interest rate. Um, yeah, and that's the first thing that I actually discussed, which was that yes, but only if there is a commission that is high on trading these bonds of these bills, bank bills. But yeah, definitely the negative interest rate means that there is less activity. Um, yeah, or maybe not enough money, because that's another thing, right? It can't just be that there's not enough money out there. Maybe that's it. But the thing is, right? There's not enough money. Why don't you just? Well, they just printed out money, right? But not enough. But then the question is it real economy or is it fictional economy, right? But how? If you don't have enough money, then even the fictional economy is not sustaining the economy. Like, like I will assume that the fictional economy exists because banks are opportunistic. That's how it is. So you remove that, then maybe even the economy is worse than we expect. Or we just need a contraction. The thing is, you need a contraction, right? That's what's happening. A deflation, over the world, and I think that relates then. Okay, so we had a commodity market, right? Now we had the forex for all the currencies. So the thing is that you've maybe tried to make the euro and the dollar less worse than they are, less worth, not worse, worth than they are supposed to be, in the sense that you can trade in other countries, and therefore you're willing to have money more in those, but the US and Euro still want to compete with these, and therefore they are making their currencies a little bit lower in value. Well, China is also doing the same. So maybe, yeah, that's why. And by China devaluing their currency, then then the value of the dollar increases. But now we want the value of the dollar to decrease. I've misunderstood something. Please, guys, if you know anything, let me know in the comments. That would be very nice. Yeah, yeah. I need to think about this. This is not something that I know at this point. I will take some time to think about it. And the question that I will be asking for myself tomorrow is going to be something to do with negative interest rates, but maybe inflation and deflation and the negative interest rate, or the impact of negative interest rate on inflation and deflation. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. What is the impact of negative interest rate on not that currency, I think currencies, currencies, inflation or deflation. Well, thanks for staying tuned and thanks for listening. As I did yesterday in the first episode, I will not end this by just having a slogan like, "Oh, see you guys, have fun." No, I will give you some thoughts, some motivation. So, guys, yesterday we talked about doing your passion. Today I'm gonna talk about and doing and not planning too much, maybe being spontaneous. Today I would like to motivate you to sit down and think about what you want. It's important to know what you want. Let's say you don't know what you want. Ask yourself a question. If you had all the money in the world and you did not have to consider money as an obstacle to live life, what would you be doing? And apparently I would be sitting here reading and discussing economic theories, philosophizing about them, not really looking at the empirical parts of it. I might do that later on, right, to prove some ideas and some thoughts. But firstly, you have to think about them. So I like to think, I like to read things that are real, not fictional, but non-fictional. I like to read things that important people have written, something that is challenging a little bit. I don't like when things are easy. I like them when they are challenging. And there's not an individual that doesn't ask themselves, what if I don't really want this? That always happens. But the idea is that you make your own bed and you lie in it. And if you never make a bed, you will never lie down. So the idea is to find something that is worth your time and then stick with it. Of course, unless it's something that's bad, don't do that. Of course, don't do that. But if it's good and it's something that gives you meaning and a goal in life, right? Even momentarily, not for a long time, just momentarily, you have to do it. You owe it to yourself. While I was running today, I did something that I usually did in the past, right? Is to put myself outside my own body and then look at myself. Karim, I said, because you're in control of Karim's body, right? And Karim's life. That's the mind that is in control of it. And then I thought to myself, Karim, you, oh my God, this is really inception because I think, so I'm Karim now, and then I thought about Karim that is outside who talked to Karim. But regardless, that's the amazing. That's very amazing that the mind can think like that. But the idea is that I thought you owe more to Karim than this. Karim deserves much better than this. Karim worked so hard. So the past Karim, right? I'm talking to past Karim. The past Karim has worked so hard to reach where we are today. Don't throw it. Continue. You've planned so much for us. So continue working in that direction. Do your best. Believe in yourself and believe that what you've gone through and all the achievements that you have are somewhat aligned. And you have a goal. You know what kind of what it is, right? So pursue it. And that's the thing. Do something that gives you meaning, even if it gives you meaning momentarily. Because that's the only thing that will give you meaning. There's not a lot of things that may give you meaning in life. But if you know that's one thing, 1 second of the day, this thing gives you meaning in life. And all the other seconds in the day, you don't have any meaning in life. Then do that one thing. Okay. Take care. I want to say peace out, but take care of yourself and be responsible and just go for it. Love you, man. Bye.